remember yesterday when I become the moon. When all the stars came out to play, we danced away the gloom. Circled round the ring of stones before they fell in ruin. And I can hear our voice.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Natalie, and I'm your Sunday co-host for Witches of the Moon. Welcome back to week 20, and this week we are covering moon phases. My topic today is the full moon, and this is a topic that is particularly special to me. I have, since I was a young child, loved the moon, particularly the full moon. To me, there's nothing better than a Samhain with a full moon. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the full moon phase and magic that's done during that time and what it means to us as witches. Now, as you know, the moon to us relates to the goddess just as the sun relates to the god. And so during the full moon, many witches, not all, but many witches do recognize the esbats. Esbats are the full moon, and many people will engage in ritual during the full moon. Now, I don't engage necessarily in a full ritual where I lay on my altar and I cast my circle and I do all of that, but I do always try to do something during the full moon to honor the goddess. So this is also a time when the power of the goddess is the strongest within the month. So we will do things like set out our materials to charge. A lot of people set out water to soak in the power of the moon and use that in ritual or in spells. I do that. I will set out my crystals and let them charge. I'll set out my wands and let them charge under the light of the full moon. If you are a follower of Raven Grimassi, he talks about how it's important time phase as well as the moon. So between after 9 o'clock and between, usually in his writings, he says after 9, around midnight is the most potent time, but any time prior to the sunrise, because once the sun comes up, the moon's power is diminished and you're under the power of the sun. So anything that you charge during the moon, you do not want to allow the sunlight to touch, is kind of his thinking. Now, I agree with that in some ways, and I disagree with it in others. To me, there's a balance. So you have a balance of moonlight and sunlight, and there are some things I will charge with sunlight versus moonlight. But the full moon is the time when that power is at its most potent. A lot of the research, a lot of the writing says that the types of magic that you want to conduct from the time of the new moon up to the time of the full moon would be things that are additive types of magic. So things like love spells, attraction spells, anything that has a positive nature to it, something you want to add to your life. So for example, well, and then in reverse, it would be from the full moon going down to the new moon, the waning cycles of the moon, you would do diminutive magic. So if, say, for example, you want to do a love spell, just because it's not a moon phase leading up to the full moon or it's not the full moon does not mean you cannot do love magic. Really, your intent, I think, is the most powerful, but if you're wanting to gain a little oomph to your spell and you want to add some moon magic to it, then you would consider the moon phase for your spell. Full moon being the best time for that type of magic. So, for example, if you wanted to do a spell, say you had an immediate need for a spell that's more of a negative nature. Everything has a positive and a negative side to it. So if you had, going back to a love spell, just because right now that seems to be what's on my mind, if you are wanting to work a love spell and it's the full moon, that would be an ideal time to do it. So you would gather up your materials that you're going to be using, you would get your visualization in place, you'd put your intent in place, you would use, the correct corresponding color, red, pink, herbs like jasmine, mistletoe, which mistletoe is kind of a funny one because it can be used for malediction as well as for benedictive magic. So that's for another topic. But you would gather up everything that you plan to use. If you have form candles, a lot of times people that are casting those spells will use candles that are in the form of male or female or whatever, or bulb candles for several days, like a 7-day spell. Excuse me. but your full moon time would be the time when you would cast for that type of work. Now, if you have a spell that's of a negative nature, you're trying to get rid of something or keep something away, it does not mean that you cannot do that kind of working during the full moon. What you want to do is flip it. So for example, if you're wanting to do a weight loss spell, and you're wanting the potency of the full moon, you would just flip that spell and say, okay, I'm not wanting to lose weight so much as I'm wanting to gain skinniness or gain health, which is probably more what you should be going for rather than, you know, skinniness per se. You want to be healthy because certain level of skinniness is not healthy. I think we all know that. So you're saying, okay, I want to bring healthy weight to myself. So the full moon, you would start casting and using the full moon for that. Now, I know that Blythe talks in her video about how some people feel that there's like a 3-day grace period in the full moon scales and in the new moon scales, because she talked about the new moon. And I have seen that in some of the literature, that you've got like a 3-day window where the moon is full and you can do it. But sorry about that brief interruption. As I was saying, there are some people in the literature, and you'll see in some of the literature where it says that you've got a 3-day grace period on the moon phase, that you can do it the day before, the day of, and the day after. And I kind of follow Blythe's thinking in that regard. I think if your intention is there and your visualization is strong enough, it's going to have a pretty strong impact on your magic. However, I am one of those that likes things by the book, and for me, there's not a grace period. If it's not the full moon, it's not the full moon. Now, that being said, remember that the moon goes full for a certain specific time, and then it's not full. So if you're looking at it in that regard, then, you know, if you want to be strict by the book, you got to be doing it at the time that the moon goes full. The problem with that is that could be 5 o'clock in the evening, 6 o'clock in the morning on that particular day, 4 o'clock in the morning on that particular day. So it kind of varies. Now, how do you know what the moon phases are? Well, there's a couple of ways. If you can look up moon phases online, and for example, I mean, I'm going to read this, but this is something that I printed off that I was going to put into my book of shadows, and I accidentally put it on the paper. But this came from calendar-365/moon-phases. And if you just put in moon phases 2015, it's one of the first ones that pops up. Sorry once again. Anyhow, you can look up the moon phases anywhere online. You could also invest in a Llewellyn's Magical Almanac. Now, sorry, the lighting here is bad. This was last year's almanac, and I found this quite a useful item, in addition to having all of the different correspondences, important dates. If you're into astrology, it's got all of the things you would need for that as well. When the moon is void of course, when it is, you know, Mercury is retrograde and all that good stuff that everybody fears and dislikes. Has the colors of the day. It's got incense that corresponds, and it lists each and every moon phase and the time the moon goes full, enters a particular sign, or anything of that nature. And what's really nice about the almanac too is that in addition to that stuff, it also gives you some interesting writings and perspectives from various different authors, which I will probably be taking some of these out and putting them into my Book of Shadows, because although this particular almanac is not good for this year, this was last year's, I find a lot of the writings very interesting. And to be honest with you, the almanac portion of it, that's it. That's the entire almanac portion. So there's not much to the almanac itself, except there's a lot of good, interesting writings and perspectives and ideas and spells and that kind of thing that they add into their inspirational kinds of things. The use of colored candles, that kind of thing. So it's a good investment if you are still trying to keep track of some of that stuff or learn some of that stuff, or if you're just like me and you forget things really easy. The almanac is good because it doesn't include just the moon phases. It includes other correspondences and things which you may find useful in your magical practice and in your path. I am one of those people that I like things by the book to a certain extent, and what I mean by that is there are certain aspects of my craft that I like to be quite traditional in, and there are certain things where I feel that for me it's just not quite as important. Moon phase, I think, is important, but I don't think it's necessarily a hindrance to my practice. If my intent, my visualization is strong enough, that spell's going to work. and if it's not, then it won't. And it doesn't matter what the moon phase is. So the full moon would be that time when you do more of your additive or attractive magic, if bringing something to you, if you want a real kick to your magic, even if you're working a maledictive spell, you can utilize the magic. That is the time when you would draw down the moon. And if you want to know more about drawing down the moon, that would be something that I actually would look at some of Raven Gramassi's books. In his book, The Witchcraft, he has a whole section on drawing down the moon and using the moon phases and using the moon to enhance your magic, work with your tools, to consecrate your tools, and that sort of thing. And it's a good read. I don't agree with everything in The Witchcraft. For me, the best part of the book was the second half of the book, where he starts talking about actually using the moon phases and using some of the stuff and how to create your tools of the craft and how to consecrate them properly and so on and so forth. He gives a lot of historical perspective in that book, which I enjoyed, but for me, it was the meat and bones of drawing down the moon and using the moon power and the moon phases to strengthen your craft. So that it's a good read for that. Most of your authors are going to cover something about that in the Book of Modern Witchcraft, which was gifted to me over the Yule holiday. I haven't read the whole book, but she does have a section in there on that. I think the author's name is Sky Abramson, Sky, something like that. I'll figure it out, and I may do something on that in my personal channel. I may do a review on that book on my personal channel. But moon phases, the full moon, time when the goddess's power is most potent. Many people do an Esbot ritual, not everybody does. It's a good time for charging your materials, a good time for renewing the power of your materials. It's a good time to collect moon water to use in ritual or to use in cleansings and that kind of thing. It's a time for additive magic, for a real boost to your personal power, and particularly if you're having your cycle and you're female, as Dragonwind talked about earlier this week. That is also a potent time. I realize that this video has been fraught with a lot of interruptions and that it's probably not as complete as it could be. I do apologize, but this has been kind of a crazy day, so it's always crazy in my household. But I hope that this video was informative enough to you about the full moon, and I hope that you'll realize that just because the moon may not be full doesn't mean you can't work a spell, or the spell you work's not going to be completely potent. It's just a good time to harness that power. You can draw down the moon. If you're doing, one spell, yes, one spell where it is vital that you do it on the full moon would be when you're doing a witch's knot. If you're making a witch's cord that's got the 9 knots, then you do need to harness that. And the nice thing about that is you're harnessing that full moon power to use at any other time. So if you're doing something and you're using a witch's knot, or a knot spell, you're using that power, you're harnessing that power during the full moon for you to use at any time. So that would be something to look at, and that is also something that Raven Gramassi talks about in his book, The Witchcraft. You can probably find information on that in other sources, but that's been the main one, and I found that that one was the most complete and most true to tradition. And like I said, some of those things I like to be kind of traditional about. So I hope that you all gained some information from this video, and I'm sorry for the frequent interruptions by my lovely family. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and blessed be. Thanks.